All right, I'm ready. You ready?
Let's do it.
Hi, I'm your wizard in training sheep, and this is my co-host familiar, Cheese.
I'm not a familiar, I'm a free spirit.
Well, we sold out, and now we have a coffee. This was one of the weirdest decisions that I've decided to make, but honestly, it is in the spirit of reviewing Mikage and Imageepoch. He's not dead or anything, but honestly, this is what he would want. You have an idea, and you want to cash in on it, and we're doing just that. So there really is no real reason for you to support the coffee, but it's just an outlet if you do want to support the channel. Cheese and I really don't need it, but selling out is honestly in the spirit of the review series, and we're just going all in. So Cheese, what are your thoughts on selling out?
So, as is usually the case with thing that wants to make money and people on the internet wanting everything to be free, usually there would be some backlash, but, this series, so probably not going to be any of that. It's fine.
Yeah, honestly, we're just embracing the meme here. So everything on this channel is completely free, and the only time I will be advertising it is on the podcast episode where we do get out of character. So in character, no reference of the coffee whatsoever, but really what you are getting are just the failures and all of the double takes that I've made, and maybe just a few jokes that never made it on the final review series. So really, the reason why I wanted to bring all of my bloopers and all of my failures to light is because the Luminous Arc 2 review was a disaster. To put it very simply, there were 8 re-records culminating in one failed video. So with all of these mistakes, I really do want to have a level of transparency so that way you do know that it really is just me and Cheese working on it, and we do make mistakes and we do acknowledge them. In fact, with Luminous Arc 2, I messed up in the first sentence. The director of Luminous Arc 2 was Shietsu Kadawaki, while Hideyuki Mizutani was the producer. With all of this in mind, I'm going in the direction of Imageepoch where I'm just throwing things at a wall and hoping it sticks, and this really needs to stop. I'm making a lot of mistakes and I'm just not proud of it, and I really do want to show you, the viewer, that I am capable of not only recognizing my mistakes, but also am capable of laughing at it. And Cheese, with this idea of addressing research mistakes, how do you think we should target this moving forward?
I think that the channel Kurzgesagt does a pretty good job of remedying any sort of research mistakes that they do. I think the way they do it is if it's a significant enough issue, they'll scrap the video entirely and redo it. Otherwise, they'll just put updated information in their descriptions. So that's the way to do it.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. So I can definitely do that moving forward, starting with Luminous Arc 2 review. Let's go over the core of the podcast, the history and staff of Luminous Arc 2, and go into the lore of Luminous Arc 2 compared to Luminous Arc 1. So we'll start off with the history and staff, and this time around, it's easier to list who is new at Imageepoch and who doesn't return for Luminous Arc 2. Keeping track of the staff within Imageepoch is something that I'm really interested in because as the company gets bigger, you're going to see people leave, obviously, and people come in, but I really do want to make this a series about the people who stayed with Mikage until the very end. With a lot of the UI designers, in particular Jun Ishiwatari, there is a common theme amongst all the games, that being a very simplistic but very easy to read UI. So it's not just about Mikage within this series. He is the face of Imageepoch, but this is also a story of the people behind the scenes, and I really do want to keep track of them. I am in the process of trying to get this big Excel file that I can share with all of you that lists all of the staff from Luminous Arc 1 all the way to Stellar Glow and further beyond into 7th Dragon VFD. Cheese, what are your thoughts on keeping track of the staff like this?
Think that's pretty much how I would do it. You would probably scrape some resumes or an equivalent Japanese LinkedIn to figure out years and months, but it's not much you could really do for that. So estimates all around.
We're trying to not only understand something that is fundamentally Japanese, but also do research in a place where we're inherently locked out of. It's kind of a challenge, but it's something that throughout the series and hopefully by the end of this series, I'll have enough knowledge to really get something definite rather than just a lot of speculation, which unfortunately is a weakness of this podcast. But moving on and going into some of the different staff members, with Luminous Arc 2's opening animation, we have a lot of big names working for the anime opening. In particular, Akira Fujishima, who was the producer for Zero no Tsukaima. For those of you who don't know, that is the familiar of Zero. Going into the editing of the anime opening, you have Shigeru Nishiyama, who edited Toradora, which is yet another anime about a short tsundere girl with a tall, kind of lax guy. I just thought that was really interesting about Imageepoch reading a market and trying to say, well, we know this sells, can we do the same with our product? With the main theme in particular, they're doing the same exact thing with Kana and her song Unlimited World. With Luminous Arc 1, we have Kaori Oda, and she was coming off from Fiction Junction with her debut single. This worked really well for Luminous Arc 1, but with Kana and Unlimited World, she kind of just fizzled out. She doesn't really have any big songs after that, whereas Kaori Oda continued to be a pretty big rising star in the world of Japanese music. So already you're noticing that Imageepoch is returning to this same mindset that they use in Luminous Arc 1, trying to capture that lightning in a bottle feeling, and now they're beginning to see that it's not working. So moving on from the anime opening, we can go into the general staff, and there are way more planners. You have a two-team split between the adventure, or the story planning, and the battle planning. In particular, the adventure planning had one of the writers from Luminous Arc 1, Maiko Shimura, while the other writer, Atsui Komine and Hideyuki Mizutani, wrote the story for Luminous Arc 2. This is really interesting because Hideyuki Mizutani, the producer, is stepping in to write the story, so him taking the responsibility of writing the story is honestly really fascinating to me. With the new planners that came in for battle planning, the fact that the game was very tight narratively and very well paced in terms of battle, at least until you get Fatima, that really goes to show that they put in a lot of effort with the presentation of the story and the game, and it was more enjoyable from playing Luminous Arc 1. When it comes to the contract workers, it's a little bit deceptive. I noticed in Luminous Arc 1, whenever they listed a contract worker, they listed the affiliation immediately. So let's say, for example, you have a sound producer, they worked with Cube Incorporated, they would have the name, and then in parentheses, they would list Cube Incorporated. Here in Luminous Arc 2's credits, you don't see that very often. With only about 2 or 3 names in the Japanese staff, you see the affiliation, but within the special thanks, you see a huge list of companies that they contracted out to, namely Bullets Incorporated, Cube Incorporated for the sound, Pull to Win for bug testing. It's almost like a business strategy in of itself, because if you list less contract workers on your credits, it looks like you have a lot of employees at Imageepoch. So from the outside looking in, it looks like Imageepoch is a really successful company, but when you notice the workers who came from Luminous Arc 1 and continuing their work with Luminous Arc 2, and then when you see the special thanks and see the company that they originally worked for in Luminous Arc 1, you can't help but think it's a little bit something wrong. Cheese, what are your thoughts on this?
So I have a friend that does contract animation work. Kind of like Imageepoch, those companies also just list the contracted company. And it stings a little bit, you not really getting credited for the work you've done. But I guess that's part of the gig. You just kind of go unmentioned, you did your job.
That's a really interesting point, Cheese, because in particular the voice actors, they do not get a fair shake. The English voice actors, they only list the voice acting studio, Bang Zoom Entertainment. They do not list the voice actors themselves, so unfortunately a lot of the extra slides in Luminous Arc 2 went to the localizers. Yeah, overall, it's kind of a disappointment that a lot of the contract workers that did come in for Luminous Arc 2 weren't really recognized as well as they should have been. Moving on to some of the other things that showed up in the review. This was a TGS 2008 handout, and this really helped clue me into Mizutani's thought process of Luminous Arc 2, so without that booklet I wouldn't know much. This is where I'm going to stand on soapbox and really start to Doompost. And it turns out that with Luminous Arc 2, there was a tie-in radio drama with Fatima. It was only 2 episodes long, but I cannot find that on the internet anywhere. This is really going to mess with me because with Luminous Arc 3, there was an entire interview series leading up to the release of Luminous Arc 3 with all the voice actors, and Hideyuki Mizutani himself kicked off that interview series. Everybody who was interested in Imageepoch deserves the chance to see every last bit of material and make their own judgment on it. I don't care if it's 5 minutes of pure PR, 5 minutes of please look forward to it. Every single one of us deserves a chance to listen to it, interpret it, and then we get to decide if it's shit. You can take a video game, you can take any one of the Imageepoch games, you can review it inside a vacuum, and that's it, you're done. With Luminous Arc and with Imageepoch, Seventh Dragon, all of these games as a whole, I don't see them as just a video game, I see them as the story surrounding it making it special. Cheese, you have a few experiences like this with Lost Media. I think you understand where I'm coming from. It's not so much the game, it's really the story and the times that you enjoyed the game that make it special. With Seventh Dragon in particular, well, it makes me nostalgic for the time that I spent with Seventh Dragon, not so much the game, but how excited I was to share it with you and what eventually brought this series to light. Cheese, what is your story and what are your thoughts on losing all of this important supplementary material?
It's a difficult question, right? I had a thought of like, oh, well, you're probably not going to be a very enthusiastic archaeologist, are you, if you're only discovering bits and pieces? But those are the bits and pieces that are exciting, right? Time will decay all things. You're not going to be able to preserve everything. So it's interesting to put together the story with what you actually have. And I guess recently I was looking up some musicians to see if I could find some of their old albums. And what a surprise, you know, the thing that artists do where they go on a bit of a rampage and delete everything they have and now it's all gone. But when you find a bit of somebody's history just kind of off in the distance somewhere, in this case it was on archive.org, which does great work. That was pretty exciting to me. I enjoyed that. So a little bit of the story comes back and you get to enjoy it.
Yeah, I really agree. I think with me, it's grappling the fact that I'm not going to have the entire story, but whatever few pieces that I have, I'm really thankful for. When I first started this entire series, I was devastated that I couldn't find Nyaden's Crisis, the Seventh Dragon VFD drama CD. One day, I just got lucky. I found it. I don't think I've ever been happier to rip what is literally 1 hour of high-pitched squealing. And for me, that is the most important thing, because the fact that I'm able to have a hold of it and make sure that somewhere, somehow, some way it gets into the hands of someone else who is not as lucky as I am, that means the world to me. I don't care if all the material I've gathered is shit. What I care is that I can share it with you and you can make your own judgment on it. That's the joy of it. Getting past the things that you do lose, you just look at it, you say you lost it, and you gotta move on, I guess. Trying to move out of this doom and gloom section, let's move into something a little more lighthearted, a little bit wackier. Let's move on to the gameplay and lore. With Luminous Arc 2, I didn't really do that much of the story justice. I decided to save it for the podcast because the podcast is a better place just to talk about the story. Honestly, I don't want to have a video with my wacky commentary for just the story. With this section of the podcast, I'm going to try something a little different, and I'm going to directly compare Luminous Arc 1 versus Luminous Arc 2. They are almost the same story, beat for beat. I'm going to prove this to you by summarizing the entire stories right now. With Luminous Arc 1, you have the boy meets girl scene. Lucia makes a very bad first impression, and she immediately shit-talks Alf and company upon meeting them. She tries to redeem herself by saving Alf's life, but Lucia is so upset with Alf being her rim. Alf is more or less brainwashed by the church to hate witches. Every time Lucia interacts with Alf, Lucia is just as intolerant to the church as the church is intolerant to the witches. This is because she is an extremely poorly written tsundere. Tsunderes aren't bad, they're just extraordinarily easy to mess up. With Luminous Arc 1's writing, you never really see Lucia's more sensitive and more delicate side, so you only ever see her mad, and since we self-insert into Alf, we never really see what happens when Lucia storms off on the party. Those moments where we do need to sympathize with her, we never get. Meanwhile, with Luminous Arc 2, the first thing that Alti says is quite literally a joke, like, I fell from the sky. Are all knights like this? They can't even catch a girl falling from the sky? Like, come on. Roland immediately picks up on this. He's like, you literally fell out of the sky. What do you expect me to do? So that whole meeting is actually treated as comedy. That is the start of their relationship. Yes, they're arguing, but they're arguing over something that is so ludicrous that it's actually funny. After we defeat the antagonist for the first time, we enter the Sickness Arc. With Luminous Arc 1, the Sickness Arc is Theo turning into a Scaly by Vanessa's magic. With Alti, after she engages with Roland, Alti collapses and faints. This actually has a lot of different meanings, and if you play through New Game Plus, you can really look at some of the subtext that is present within this one scene. When Alti faints, your first reaction is, well, she's not a full-fledged witch like Dia, but in reality, the reason why Alti fainted was because she's half Beast Fiend and a clone of the Mage Queen. Their bodies tend to go haywire when there is a lot of emotional strain put on them. In particular, Alti's half Beast Fiend blood is going to play an important role in the transformation arc, where in Luminous Arc 1, Theo's curse is halted completely by Pion Pion, and it is completely dropped from the plot. That first third of the game is almost completely pointless. With Luminous Arc 2, when the team confronts Matthias in the desert, Dia is ready to sacrifice herself to kill Matthias. Alti intervenes, and she transforms using her Beast Fiend powers to defeat Matthias. But at the end of that battle, fighting Matthias, she is completely bedridden. Ayano urges Roland to become a master in order to stop Matthias. This quest to become a full-fledged knight is treated as very dramatic in both games, and with Luminous Arc 1, this is the point where I no longer cared about Lucia. At this point, Alf has defected from the Luminous Church and now is fighting for the witches. Because Alf is effectively running away from the Luminous Church, he runs into Heath, his mentor, and he now has to fight Heath. Alf has had his worldview systematically broken. It's very understandable that Alf is having his doubts, and Alf is extremely conflicted. And Lucia snaps at Alf for not having the mental fortitude as everyone else on the team. Lucia just kicks Alf while he's down. And what makes this even worse is that Alf realizes that he loves Lucia despite all of the emotional abuse, and they form their bond and Alf becomes Lucia's rim. Meanwhile, with Luminous Arc 2, when Roland has to go become a master in order to beat Matthias, he is confronted by Sadie, who fought alongside Master Matthias. This test from Sadie is twofold. One, to see if Roland can actually become a master by fighting a witch, and two, to see if Roland can match Matthias' strength to see if he is even a competent master like Matthias. Once that duel is over, Roland enters the Mother Lapis, and this is where the Mother Lapis begins to create a manifestation of Roland's negative emotions. Roland's shadow points out that Alti and Roland don't always get along. They do have their fights, and even questions why Roland is suddenly so protective and suddenly caring about Alti. Not only is the game trying to make it a little bit more personal, but the game is also pointing out, hey, you suddenly care about Alti. Why? It tries to round out Roland's personality despite being a self-insert, whereas Alf really just suddenly gains confidence about being a rim, and it just fizzles out. This leads us to the point in the game where the plot falls apart in both cases. There is a massive twist, and they do nothing to make you sympathize with the antagonists. With Luminous Arc 1, Priel, our Valley Girl angel, just kind of shows up, and this leads to the twist of Hugo and Kingston lamenting that they just wanted to enslave God. Is that so hard to ask? At this point, the church is guilty of turning orphans into what are effectively mindless slaves, destroying villages to get Lepiciae, you name it. With Luminous Arc 2, Barva also just kind of shows up. You have a realization that Matthias had no idea what he was doing. With the conclusion gate leading to the origin of magic, which Matthias believes is the source of beast fiends, the conclusion gate can only be opened up with a sacrifice of human souls. Because nobody believed that Master Matthias could open up the gate, Matthias turned completely evil, decided to raise Fatima all on his own, but had no idea what lied beyond the conclusion gate. So when Barva swoops in to stop him, you get to see how clueless Matthias really was. For some reason, everybody starts feeling sorry for him, despite the fact that Matthias killed Roland's foster father chapters before. This really seems like something that Bandai Namco would do with like Tales of Symphonia or the later games like Tales of Vesperia. It's really interesting because Mikage worked with Bandai Namco with Tales of Symphonia. The Tales of series is notable and somewhat notorious for these sudden scenes that try to make you sympathetic to the villain. With Luminous Arc 2, while Fatima's redemption was rushed, she still isn't forgiven very quickly. She doesn't really forgive herself, nor does she forgive the team for getting in her way. Vanessa had for a while this mentality of I was right all along, and you, Roland, you will never compare to Matthias. She only ever warms up to Roland on her route, and even then she's never really forgiven for stealing the Fire Crest, nor is she forgiven for stealing the Enigma, but she does willingly hand over the Enigma towards the end of the game, so there is mention of the things that she did earlier in the game. With Luminous Arc 2, those small details in the plot weren't lost on them. Moving on further, we have the additional love interests. With Luminous Arc 1, Vanessa in particular is kind of like a second love interest, with her intermissions being a little more suggestive than the other intermissions. But at the end of that intermission, you have Vanessa more or less saying, Alf, you can stop being Lucius Rim at any time, so be my Rim. This begs the question, what makes a Rim? Is that dragon's blood? Because with Theo is Alf's brother. Why can't Theo be any other witch's Rim? There are so many questions that Vanessa raises in her intermissions, and the story is incapable of answering all of those questions. With Luminous Arc 2, there are more plot points to talk about with this love triangle between Fatima, Alti, and Roland. Obviously, there is more of a romantic aspect because of engagement, but all the witches treat it more like teasing. But with Alti in particular, her bond with Roland is explicitly made with love. With Fatima's route in particular, with Roland overcorrecting and being too friendly with Fatima, causes Alti to obsess over Roland and turn into the boss of Fatima's route. With all of the plot points established in Luminous Arc 2, they're doing well and bringing it to a conclusion with either Alti's route using the power of love, or with Fatima's route with Alti turning into or succumbing to her beast fiend nature. The final boss shows up from nowhere in both cases. With Luminous Arc 1, it just wanted to destroy the world. I am so much of a schizo that I believe that the lore is almost ripped one-to-one from Genova, so you can watch the podcast episode on that. But with Luminous Arc 2, the final boss shows up from nowhere, and you can only get an understanding of what happened by reading the lore. You have the previous Mage Queen Alicia, living in a pocket dimension because she experimented with life magic, and that's something you're not supposed to do. With life magic, she tried to create children because she couldn't stand the thought of children dying as her time as Mage Queen. She rose to Mage Queen, saving countless children. That took a toll on her when she couldn't save them, and ended up creating the Beast Fiends, ended up creating Ayano and Alti. So the precursors in Luminous Arc 2 were the Nevellians. They sealed off Queen Alicia after she went mad, and the Kingdom of Carvana was pretty much made to make sure that nobody opens up the Origin of Magic beyond the Conclusion Gate, because that is how you're going to open up all the Beast Fiends to take over the world. We are almost at the end of this plot review. I'm going to poke at a few things with Luminous Arc 1. You could have prevented the entire plot if Lucia were actually smart with Alf. If Lucia just spirited away Alf, tried to at least welcome Alf into the world of the witches and show them that they're not evil, and if everyone actually just got their shit together and not fought amongst each other, you could have actually had a sympathetic team that is different from the intolerant Luminous Church. With Luminous Arc 2, the unintended moral is that covering things up hurts everybody. With Steiner, he distances himself from his sister Rena and goes mad with revenge. He doesn't really want to admit the purpose of his experiments to Rena, so there is a bit of a divide. Even Rena points out that Steiner doesn't act the way he does anymore. With Dia, as the leader of the Rev Academy, she willingly covers up the truth of Matthias, and this is to the point that she covers up so many details that she unintentionally causes Stephen's death because Stephen does not understand why Matthias is evil. If any of them had the chance to talk to each other, they probably could have talked each other down, or at least convinced Stephen to at least stand down so he can live another day. Sadie is so broken with Matthias going down that route that she just fucks off. Sadie could have helped vouch in favor of Matthias and try to explain what's going on to Dia and the rest of the witches. And with Matthias in particular, 1, it's okay to kill people as long as you have a valid reason for it. 2, it's okay to abandon your kid and your wife to shack up with an underage girl and her cat. And 3, brainwashing is okay if you're right. Now that we have explained the entirety of Luminous Arc 1 and Luminous Arc 2, what do you like more?
Jesus. I don't know how to fucking respond to that.
I did not take any of that out of context. With Sand of Destruction, it's going to get even worse because the writer from Xenogears comes back. We're going to have a lot more fun looking at these unintended morals and unintended aspects of the plot. I did mention that this game kind of hates on furries. That's because Beast Fiends tend to be furry. This is a really big plot point in Sand of Destruction. It tries to be an analog for some of the more social issues in Japan. With Luminous Arc 2, it's just to show you that the antagonists are not human at all and they should not be treated as human. Unfortunately, with the furry subculture as it is, you know what I'm getting at. Sands of Destruction is even worse, and please stay tuned for that. That is pretty much it for this podcast, so let's finish it up and wrap up with some closing thoughts. Overall, Luminous Arc 2 review was a pretty big mess. I struggled technically, and I'm really not proud of how Luminous Arc 2's review turned out. Cheese, you saw 2 end results. How do you think the review turned out?
It's complicated because you were trying a lot of technical stuff during this review, and you were also trying a lot of logistical stuff as well. It became a little bit of a hassle to manage, it seems, so the review sort of suffered in clarity a little bit as a result. That's not to say it was strictly like horrendous. I mean, it still got the point across, but it was definitely a learning project.
Yeah, to that point with Luminous Arc 2, it really was just a learning experience, and I really don't want that to affect the final review. So moving forward with Sand of Destruction, I'm trying to pull myself out of this formulaic approach. Imageepoch is best looked at different angles, and approaches to every video should be different as a result. Yes, they are working on a same series of games from time to time, but they do try to reinvent themselves with every new game. With that in mind, I think the only place I can keep structure is in the podcast. So what are your thoughts of me trying to change everything up in the videos and me trying to stick to something more concrete within the podcast?
I have mixed feelings because the video should be somewhat structured in and of itself, but the podcast can also be partly structured and partly freeform. The whole story segment that you did, I think, can be sort of structured and pre-recorded in advance without me, and then we can do sort of more freeform analysis with me if you'd prefer that. And I think that might work a little better.
Okay, we can try that with Standard Destruction because we have 3 iterations of Standard Destruction to look at. With that in mind, I really am liking the division of gameplay and lore. What do you think?
I think it works pretty good. In a video format, it's sort of a lot to manage, but in just audio form, sort of a summary of the story works just fine.
We're going to try something completely different with Standard Destruction. This is the first multimedia work, so I think it deserves something completely new. That being said, let's end this. So please remember to like, subscribe, and comment. Again, there is a coffee. You are under no obligation to support us financially. It is literally just there so we can complete the meme. I am Sheep, and that is my co-host Cheese, and we will see you all next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.